and I do a lot of paperwork. That's most of it. But really, at the base of it, the thing that I do for my work is I talk about stories. And we spend our whole lives immersed in stories. We learn stories about how society is supposed to work, about what justice is, and we learn a lot of stories about what family is. So here's a story that I learned about my family when I was small. I learned that I had a mommy and I had a daddy, and they loved each other, and then they created a family, and that was me. And when I was a grown-up, I would have my own family. And that's a pretty common narrative. And it's the story that's embedded in our law, that's embedded in our society, that you have your sort of base family, the family that you come from. It propels you into adulthood, at which point you meet your partner, your spouse. That person, they're everything to you. You and that person, you mutually fulfill all of one another's social and romantic and financial needs. Then you procreate yourselves, continue the cycle, and the family unit fits perfectly into the structure of society. Now, corollary to that story is the idea that any deviation from that story, any way in which your life doesn't look like that, is something that you're doing wrong. If your story does look like that, you're living correctly, and that you will therefore be rewarded with benefits, stability, healthcare, citizenship, all of the things that come along with family. And that if you're failing to do that, it's a personal failing, and that it is appropriate then for you to be punished with instability, failure to access resources, and that your family's not real, that it's not meaningful. So we get taught that this one story of family is right, that it's traditional, that it's sanctioned by both church and state. And we spend our lives soaking in the idea that there are two categories of family, like this and wrong. And the thing is that all of that is fake. So this model, this idea of the nuclear family that's centered around a heterosexual monogamous dyad that is rearing children that are biologically related to both parents, and that itself comprises a family and nothing else. That idea, that model is less than 100 years old. Less than half of the families in the United States actually look like that, and if you look worldwide, it's way, way less. It's a story that was created by systems like white supremacy and misogyny and capitalism, and that has been propagated throughout the world and imposed on the diversity of family that actually exists through imperialism and violence. So it's a very powerful and pervasive story, but it's a constructed story, it's new, and it's a story that we don't have to believe. So I'm asking you to imagine, what if we threw out that story? What if we imagined that the things that we were told that we're supposed to want might not actually work for us, and that it's not because we're wrong or broken, but because those stories are simple and we are complex? So what if we stripped away what we get taught about how we're supposed to live and start from the ground up? What do I want my family to look like? What do I want it to do? So in our work at CFLC, we talk about building families out of building blocks like desire, like human connection, like collaborative creativity. We know that there are as many types of family as there are families in the world, and that meeting them where they're at and helping them get what they need looks like asking a couple of simple questions. What do you want to build? What structures do you need to thrive? How do you build it together and in a way that's flexible, resilient, and sustainable? So there are lots of ways that humans can be connected to each other. It's financial, romantic, sexual. We can live together, we can raise children together, we can own property together, we can give each other power over our health care and over our estates. We can even share our citizenship with each other. So marriage, the culmination of the story that we get taught about family marriage, is all of those connections lumped together in a big blob and all on one person. And what we do in our work is try to separate out those connections and help people build them specifically and with intention. So these connections are the practical manifestations of the intimacies and commitments that we have. They're the ways that we demonstrate that we intend to be there for each other. And so we value all of the different permutations of these connections. We want them to exist, and we want them to be done on purpose. So I've been noticing, in the last few years, I think it's more pervasive than that, but I've been noticing in the last few years, a lot of us feel like there's something wrong with the families and societies that we're trying to exist in. Things feel fractured and diffuse. People are operating out of fear and trauma and shame, and we're being cruel to each other. And we all feel constantly, at least to some extent, on this knife's edge of being rejected and isolated. And we need to feel like our people aren't going to throw us away. We should be getting that safety and stability from our families and our communities, but somehow we're not. And the question is, why aren't we getting that support we need? It's not because we can't get that support and stability and interdependence from our families, it's because we're trying to get it from somewhere that we haven't cultivated it. If we want to exist in networks of interdependence and mutual care, we have to build ourselves networks of interdependence and mutual care. So here's the story of what my family looks like now. There are a lot of us. Our relationships with each other are all different. Some of us live together. Some of us are raising children. Some of us are financially entwined. Some of us have sex with each other. So I know. Some of us pray together. Some of us work together. Some of us are ill and need care. Some of us are related by blood, some by law, some by agreement. And all of those things are created with intention and consensus and consent. We make promises to each other about how we're going to take care of each other, and those promises are specific and flexible. We don't have unspoken expectations about those things. Instead, we have a lot of meetings. We work together to build resilient relationships that can hold trauma and fear and fuck-ups without breaking. Now, my family doesn't look the way the state thinks families should look. A lot of state institutions have to be convinced to recognize my family relationships. And a lot of them just don't. This is something that we made by throwing away the story that we got told and deciding together, what promises do we want to make to each other? What do we want to build together? How do we cultivate sustainable interdependence and diminish our dependence on a fascist state? How do we reject scarcity and create abundance? This is a story that we get to make up together and spend our lifetimes telling to each other. And you get to do the same thing. You don't have to accept the story that you get told about what your family should be and what you should be getting from it. You get to make up the story yourself, and you have a whole lifetime to tell it. Thank you.